Greetings from LA, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journeys, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2023. And that brings us to a work which is described as being from the year 1962, and it has been designated by Criterion at spy number 1191. The name of the filmmaker is Orson Welles, and the name of the work is The Trial. This is the work, the incredibly mesmerizing work and quite complex work from the filmmaker, artist extraordinaire, Orson Welles. This is credited as being written by Orson Welles and directed by Orson Welles, based upon the work by Franz Kafka. And we have cinematography, Edmund Richard, and the producers, Michael Salkind and Alexander Salkind. And if we think about the extraordinary cast, we, of course, think of or recall great performers and great artists such as Jean Moreau and Elsa Martinelli and Orson Welles, and of course, as the central figure of Joseph K., we have the great Anthony Perkins here at the center of this swirl of chaos and confusion and fright in terms of what the film has to offer, and then some. This is a kind of horrific nightmare made flesh in the form of the cinematic expression of Orson Welles. It's nightmarish, it's also comic, and it's it has a great absurdist take, which is given sort of manifesting in a type of flights of cinematic whimsy and poetic whimsy and a wonderful flourish in the manner of Orson Welles. And I'm speaking, of course, of this work, which is The Trial, directed by Orson Welles. Courtesy of the Criterion Collection, this year, 2023, the Criterion Collection has released this on the 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo format, which is what I have here. We'll speak a little bit more about those details about the presentation, as well as supplements, especially when it might be compared to, say, other non-Criterion releases that have occurred over the last year or so. But before we get to that, my dear friends, let us speak about this great work, and let's try to speak about the plot or story structure of this film, The Trial, or the story The Trial. And we would focus in on a bureaucrat, an office bureaucrat who is named Joseph K., and this is, of course, Anthony Perkins, and we are thrust immediately into his dilemma, into his plight, namely that he seems to be targeted by the authorities and indeed being arrested by the authorities. For what reason, why, what's going on here, we're not quite sure. There seems to be some kind of bureaucratic or authoritarian morass, or a type of unmentioned or unmentionable sense of threat or risk or danger posed by these bureaucratic or procedural, and dare I say it, authoritarian-based processes that seem to be imposed, or whose wheels seem to be set in motion, grinding quite inexorably and quite chillingly vis-a-vis this arrest that Joseph K., our hero or anti-hero, as the case may be, seems to be subjected to. And here begins a sense of a journey or a quest, or perhaps a spiral upwards or downwards, perhaps, into further layers as to Joseph K.'s life and his daily goings-on, interactions with the police or with the authority figures, interactions with people around him in terms of his lodgings, neighbors, and the like. and interactions regarding his workplace, and we see this large bureaucratic, almost uh, 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 inhuman type of robotic sensibility about how society seems to be operating and organized, which is, I think, also a visual cue in terms of type of commentary in terms of the societal structures that seem to be a place that suggest both perhaps externally and perhaps psychologically a type of authoritarian rule that seems to have an iron grip over what one might call semblances or flourishes of individuality. And so we see those visual cues, I think, come to life in a very vivid and quite chilling way in office scenes, again, as part of the quest for us to get to know a little bit more about Joseph K., as well as his quest to figure out what's going on during the trial process. And that includes certain hearings that occur that seem to have a large absurdist quality to it. It's one of these things where you are introduced into this world of judges and courtrooms and galleries and questions and answers and interrogations that doesn't seem to quite make a lot of sense. Nothing is explained to us fully. We are not given, say, the rules of court procedure, as it were, so it's hard to follow along. And in fact, that's part of the point, perhaps, in terms of the Kafka approach as well as Orson Welles' adaptation of this. Namely, we are not knowing what the rules are, and we're not knowing why it is Joseph K. And in fact, we as viewers and spectators, and perhaps as fellow persons along the Joseph K. journey, we are not sure why it is we are here, and we are not sure what is going on, but something is going on, and something is going on that has the air of authority and menace and threat, because there is a kind of power that is being exercised, or that's being exemplified in terms of the threat of the process. Because after all, if there is a type of process that is objectively recognized via, say, a court, or via, say, a gallery, or via, say, a semblance of what might be referred to as due process, as illusory, a concept as that seems to be in the context of the trial, if there is the semblance of that, then what that means is any decision that's made at the end of the day with respect to that process, or as a result of that process, has a chilling air of finality. And if there is a finality, then there is very little one can do in order to combat it. I mean, in terms of court procedures, there is a thing which is called appeals, an appeals process, but not even that type of aspect of due process seems to be clear or in the air. And that's an example of the world that is very frightening and very chilling. That is at the very heart of the Joseph K. journey, the Anthony Perkins character journey, as he traverses from scenario to scenario to scenario, from place to place to place, trying to get legal defense, trying to arrange or understand what the next hearing is, trying to understand what it is he is being accused of. And these are fundamental things against which there is a very dangerous type of fog or haze that I think is implemented on purpose and done with a real keen eye and wit and cinematic flourish that Orson Welles and company provide in this fascinating way that is both alluring and terrifying at the same time. And I should say, too, that there are these great visual flourishes, an example of which I alluded to earlier, namely the way in which, say, office spaces are shown in this vast hall of almost a sense of lack of individuality, which is both fascinating and frightening. There are also instances of enclosed claustrophobic spaces, geography or use of geometric spaces to express architecture that seems somewhat out of whack, which seems very cold and clinical on the one hand, but when you traverse a line, then it becomes a sense of the chaotic and destructive, and perhaps the barren, in terms of a whole expansive barren atmosphere. So there is the divide between the cold and clinical geographical spaces and shapes on the one hand, and then the chaotic exterior of a barren wasteland type of visual motif on the other, which is, I think, very very much apropos, especially when we consider the possible trajectory of the journey, both physical and emotional, of our main character, Joseph K., where he starts and where he continues on and where he ends up, in a manner of speaking. So beginning, middle, and end in terms of the exploration of geographical and environmental spaces. And then also we should focus too on the character arc of the Anthony Perkins character himself, because we see his trying to grapple with the process, what's going on, le procès, what is going on, but also he seems to be grappling with people and situations and various, say, characters that he encounters that seem also to regard him in a certain way, or he regards them in a certain way. There are moments of, say, little glimpses of what Joseph K. might have done. Perhaps there are some instances of where he seems to be almost in a playful, maybe flirtatious way, speaking with some of the people that he's talking with. There is a sense of some kind of possibility or interpretation of a hidden agenda, certain relationships that might be regarded societally speaking as illicit, and whether or not he participated in such illicit relationships or not. There is some information that is hinted at, but not quite directly or clearly established. But again, that's part of the gray area. That's part of the fog, the haze that is, of course, provided throughout the film in terms of allowing us to maybe get to know who Joseph K. is, and perhaps our inability or our ability to get to know him through the lens of, say, how the exterior space and how the exterior points regard him. I think that's part of the points of a work like The Trial, the fact that someone can be either so misunderstood, or perhaps not given the chance to express what it is happened from his perspective, Joseph K.'s perspective, or perhaps there is something even more sinister afoot in terms of something that he is perceived to have done. And the perception is skewed in a way to work against him, and that skewed perception is created on purpose, which is also a very frightening prospect. Again, whether that's really happening or not during the course of the trial, it's up to you to determine and interpret as you watch the film or as you experience the story. But I should also say that it's not all darkness and gloom, one can say. I mean, there is a wit, there is a cynicism, but there's also a wit that's going on. There is also a wink to the audience. And I would say, too, that we have the absurdist notions of what's going on here. It's almost to the point of sketch comedy, how sudden random bursts of intensity occur, and it becomes so random. Some people appear in and out of the frame, or sudden characters emerge, and a new scenario or new dialogue exchange happens between that new character that has emerged and, say, the Joseph K. character. And so that creates a sense of almost sketch comedy, lightness of touch or deftness of approach. You go from place to place to place, or person to person to person. Sometimes people appear almost out of nowhere in the midst of, say, panels or interestingly arranged geographical shapes, which is quite fascinating indeed. And so it has a kind of frightening off-balance element to it, but also it has this absurdist, perhaps almost even laugh out loud quality to it. And I think that's also encouraged by the great and lively, very bubbly performance by Anthony Perkins. And this is a brilliant performance, because Anthony Perkins' depiction allows for a type of register of confusion and uncertainty, and also fear and trepidation. But also there is a way in which his interpretation or his characterization of Joseph K. allows the character to in certain instances, take command of the situation, even where it might seem totally hopeless and totally without meaning. He still has the ability to take command. He still has the ability to speak back in a way. He has the ability to snap back and maybe even laugh at the charges, or just laugh, or even in a maybe in a type of symbolic gesture type of way, spit in the faces of those that seem to be trying to attack him. And so he has an aggressive way about it, but that aggression also gives way to a sense of humor. There are moments of, again, laughter and comedy and comic timing in terms of just how odd things go. You can't help but laugh. And I think Anthony Perkins is a very wide-ranging performance allows for those moments of levity, those moments of reacting in a maybe in a way that accepts the humor and accepts the comedy of the situation, which and that in turn is another manifestation of a type of resistance on the part of Joseph K. or Anthony Perkins. You laugh in the face of one's adversaries. I mean, that's another way of a type of counterattack. And so that too, I think, holds a lot of meaning, as well as being another cinematic mode, as well as being another function, and as well as being another facet and aspect of acting performance. And I should point out too, while I'm on the subject, Anthony Perkins' performance here is utterly sublime. It's genius, and there are moments where you are totally sympathetic to the character, and then there are other moments when, yes, one admits, or I admit, when we're not quite sure. Are we really expected to wholly and completely be sympathetic to the plight of Joseph K., or are there certain aspects that might permit us to question the entirety of his motives or not, or his perspective? I mean, that type of room that the film gives and the story gives to allow for this breadth of interpretation, even with respect to our quote-unquote main protagonist, our hero or anti-hero. I think that's really great, and that shows also the depthness and the scope of the performance that Anthony Perkins gives. He is able to showcase these say seemingly maybe mysterious or somewhat enigmatic aspects of the character, while still allowing us to accompany him along for the ride, so to speak, along his journey throughout this film, The Trial. So this is quite wonderful indeed, as well as the great performances by a lot of the people that were, all the people that we see sometimes in sort of bit roles or cameo-like performances. Other figures appear with a more, say, a pronounced running time, as it were, but they all make their presence one way or another. Including the presence of Orson Welles, both in front of and behind the camera, and maybe even acknowledging the cynicism of the subject matter upon which the trial is being created in a very sly and wry and quite complex way, and that also reflects to behind the camera in the form of this work in the hands of Orson Welles. A brilliant work, which is The Trial. I must say that I don't know if I've spoken so much about the works of Orson Welles on this channel. That's one of the great faults and that's one of the great weaknesses that I have. I've always been a fan of Orson Welles' works, and as much as I've been able to watch it over the years, in terms of availability, not being available in certain forms until perhaps recently, etc. So it's been a fascinating cinema journey in terms of the Orson Welles cinema journey for me personally. But I must say that The Trial has always been one of my favorites, because it is so absurd. It's also so cold, but also very hot and very... and there are certain moments of bursts of intensity, which I really love. Explosions of intensity, let's put it that way, which I love that a sudden drift of balance between hot and cold, between comedy and terror, and always at the center we have the laser focus of Orson Welles that also allows for chaos at the same time, which is, I think, so apropos of Orson Welles and the brilliant genius of Orson Welles' art and cinema. And then, as embodied by, as I mentioned, the great performances all around, and again, surrounding the great performance of the character Joseph K. Great performance by Anthony Perkins. So this has always been one of my favorites of the Orson Welles' canon, and now it's here. It's been re-released in a number of forms, including this Criterion release, and it is this film, which is from 1962. It is The Trial. The Criterion Collection has released this film, The Trial, on this 4K UHD plus Blu-ray combo edition, and this is at spine number 1191, which is and this has the two discs, which is the 4K UHD disc, which is what I have in the player at the moment, and then there is also the option of a second disc or a Blu-ray disc to enjoy the film. The supplements, which we'll talk about later on in this video, will be found on the Blu-ray disc, but the commentary will be found on either or on both of the 4K UHD offering and the Blu-ray offering. So if you want to listen to the commentary track or watching the film, you can do so when playing the 4K disc or the Blu-ray disc. But if you want to watch the supplements, you're going to have to go to the Blu-ray disc. We'll talk a little bit about the commentary track and the supplements a little bit later in this video discussion. But first, let us speak about the presentation. Now, I have taken the liberty of removing the leaflet, the fold-out leaflet from this Criterion release prior to the start of this video discussion, because I wanted to speak about the master, as it's mentioned here. About the master, the trial is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.66 to 1. Undertaken by Studio Canal and the Cinémathèque Française, this 4K restoration was created from the 35mm original camera negative and soundtrack negatives at l'Image Retrouvée in Paris. Mastering supervisors Sophie Boyer and Jean-Pierre Boisget, Studio Canal. So this is a Studio Canal undertaking with respect to this restoration, and also Studio Canal have made a great release of this work, The Trial, in respect of the a 4K disc release by Studio Canal in the United Kingdom. Prior to the Criterion Collection release, and I can say that there are, well, and I understand that the presentation materials also form the basis of this Criterion release. So it is a very impressive restoration, incredibly impressive indeed. And so we are getting the benefit of such impressive restoration for the most part, generally speaking, when we watch this Criterion release. And I think it is quite beneficial. It is a wonderful, say, return to form. This film has been made available before, but I've never seen it look so sharp and so fresh in this way. It's really quite remarkable, and there's a type of immediacy and there's a sharpness to it that I've always seen it. It has whenever I'd seen it before in other non-restored versions, I'd always seen it in I had a Japanese release of this, and so it had a type of softness to it, which I thought was. Which added a certain way of engagement with the work. But now there's the softness, while it's still there in some areas, which I think is a sort of a purposeful application of the visual style, there's also a sharpness to the contours, which I think adds to the harsh tones in terms of a psychological effect. So that's an example of how I think this restoration effort by Studio Canal, now made available in a Studio Canal release in the UK, and also the Criterion release here in North America. I think it does wonders for a re-examination of this work, The Trial, and it's so deserving of that, because this is, as I say, one of the great films in the Orson Welles canon. So if you are looking to watch this, you're in the neighborhood in a Criterion Collection store or whatever, then this might be your opportunity. So overall, I think it's very, very good. If one had to compare the Studio Canal release, which was several months ago, and then this Criterion release, and I have the Studio Canal release, by the way, as well, so I've seen the film under the Studio Canal release, and it was brilliant, absolutely great for the reasons that I stated. And for me too, in my own eyes and ears, I think the Criterion Collection release here holds up. There is, in terms of the Studio Canal release, in terms of technical specifications, 4K related technical specifications in terms of the Studio Canal release in the UK having the sort of the HDR related Dolby Vision technical specification, whereas those specs seem to be absent from the Criterion release. At least that's my understanding. And so do I personally note a difference when I watch them? To be honest, I've seen both of them. I've seen the Studio Canal release and I've seen the Criterion release. To be perfectly honest, I don't see it when I watch them separately. I haven't had the opportunity to watch them side by side to give a comparison, so I might be able to detect something. But then again, I'm not really good when it comes to the technical stuff. I mean, I do my best, but it's all very much intuitive rather than purely technical, which is, again, another fault of mine. I really need to remedy this, but I am what I am, and so I look at it from my own subjective experience. So if my own subjective experience tells me that I can't detect any noticeable huge jump of difference between what I see of this presentation as I watched it in the earlier UK release, Studio Canal, versus how I see it now with this North American Criterion release. So what does that mean? Does that mean that maybe on paper, perhaps in terms of specifications, the Studio Canal release would seem to be, on paper, to be the slightly more superior release in terms of the optimal conditions of technical specifications from the 4K equipped point of view? So if you are in that field or you're in that department, then definitely consider the 4K release. I mean, it is very stellar for that purpose, but I am still quite pleased with the film The Trial. I see no loss of power and effect when I watch the film, when I see it in the Criterion release, and it's still very, very effective. So, and the presentation is still in general in keeping with the great efforts by Studio Canal overall. So I'm overall very, very happy with this, but I totally understand it's definitely worth considering if in terms of the Studio Canal release across the pond, as it were, to consider if you want to have a better in-depth consideration of specifications, much more in-depth than I could ever hope to achieve. But again, for me, in my own subjective viewpoint, I'm very pleased with this indeed. There are some other aspects which we'll talk about now, which also might be good points of comparison in terms of that release and this Criterion release, in terms of commentary track and supplements. But for now, that's my own take on how this looks and sounds. Okay, so now let's get into a discussion of the supplements and specifically the commentary track. And this is, I think, one of the areas which I think we can talk about how this release by Criterion is distinguished, or one of the points in which we can also distinguish this great Criterion release from, say, other non-Criterion releases. And so let me try to maneuver my microphone here so you can get a better sense of the Blu-ray screen or the 4K disc screen, because what I wanted to show, and again, I apologize for my poor presentation skills there. So. But it's hard to make out. I know, I apologize. But what I wanted to show is how you can select the commentary track when you watch the film, either on the 4K release or on the Blu-ray release, because you can watch the film and you can also watch it with the commentary track, whichever disc you choose. And the reason why I bring it up is the commentary track is great, and this is a Criterion Collection commentary track. And so if you're going to go for the Criterion release, one of the great benefits as well is being able to watch it with the option of listening to this commentary track, which is recorded by the Criterion Collection in 2023. Which features film historian Joseph McBride, author of Whatever Happened to Orson Welles, A Portrait of an Independent Career, etc. So this is a great commentary track. I'm a big fan of Joseph McBride. You know, that's one of the things about Orson Welles and Orson Welles studies, which is much like a magician, much like F for fake magician, in a manner of speaking. The more perspectives there are so many perspectives on Orson Welles studies, critical studies, and so it's one of the things that one of my film professors recommended to me many years back, is that if one intends to really take a deep dive into Orson Welles, it's highly recommended to experience as many perspectives as possible. Even the perspectives that might seem sort of factually questionable. It's always important to entertain as many perspectives, because Orson Welles is so complex and his works are so complex. So the more perspectives and the more viewpoints that one can experience, the better off one can be in one's own Orson Welles critical appraisal and journey. That was the recommendation that was made to me by one of my film professors back in the day when I wasn't in film school, but I was taking some film studies classes. And that's certainly the case, I think, of Orson Welles. With that being said, I think one of the great voices in the critical assessment and critical appraisal and admiration of Orson Welles' work and career, one of the great voices is that of Joseph McBride. I'm a big fan of Joseph McBride's work, and I think Joseph McBride's work in terms of Orson Welles' critical studies, commentary work that with Orson Welles films in the Criterion collection elsewhere, is now continuing on with this great commentary track. Again, recorded in 2023, and I've always wanted a commentary track with this film. It's a really complex, dense film, and sometimes it's really hard to reckon with. And so to have a guiding voice of Joseph McBride, and with the very calm and soothing demeanor of the voice, it's very welcoming, it's very reassuring. And also, it's filled with a lot of information. The commentary track. This is really quite great. I mean, he talks about things like this ranges from farcical to tragic. There are moments. This film can be regarded as a comedy, as a funny film, and I think it is in many ways a comedy. This is a film that is a great comedy in the Orson Welles canon. So. And I think that's also reflective of the Franz Kafka work overall. And also, there's some ideas too about Orson Welles' own biographical details around this time in terms of, say, scrutiny that was placed upon him by certain government institutions and in terms of his activities, and how that may have informed Orson Welles' viewpoint as a creative artist, his viewpoint vis-a-vis, say, spying in the governments and authoritarian regimes, etc. And this also goes hand in hand in a very interesting coincidental way with his encounter with the Salkinds, the producers. And I mentioned this earlier about there's a really great anecdote about how this project came about. It was almost by sheer happenstance or chance that it came about in terms of making this. It wasn't necessarily. It's not described here or elsewhere. It's not described as a passion project that Orson Welles had always wanted to make, but on the contrary, there was a project that Orson Welles wanted to get off the ground but couldn't, and so this was seen as a type of alternative from a list of possible alternative works that could be adapted that were available in terms of the rights to turn into a film. So it's that kind of almost procedural thought process that I think is one of the great things about art and the creative process. Sometimes it's done by chance, or sometimes it's done almost as a like on commission, as it were. But that doesn't, I think, take away from the greatness of what is possible in terms of the final product. And so I think, but also that type of anecdote, and which is acknowledged elsewhere here and also by Joseph McBride. I don't think it's meant to suggest that Orson Welles was in any way dispassionate about the project or was distant from the project, but on the contrary, this was another challenge that was placed upon him artistically and intellectually, and he was, of course, very aware of the Kafka work. Although, again, it wasn't as though he brought this to the producers and wanting to make it. At least that's how the story goes. But so he brought his skills to bear, I think, in a brilliant way. And the proof is in the pudding, in a manner of speaking. And so, and then which is great proof indeed. It's again one of my favorite works in the Orson Welles canon. And then Joseph McBride in this commentary continues on about the working with the sets and also locations. There were some international locations, certain places in Europe that were selected to be used as locations. There were certain logistical issues and difficulties that turned into problems that needed to be overcome in the great cinema flourish, or chaotic flourish as the case may be, in the hands of Orson Welles. That's one of the great ways in which this film is legendary, much like the cinematic escapades of Orson Welles are themselves quite legendary. So, and Joseph McBride explains that really well. And then also speaking too about certain aspects like the great performances by the other actors that we see. Jean Moreau is mentioned here. What a great memorable appearance that she makes, etc. And also this was also having to do with the joint production aspect of this in terms of funding internationally. And also there's some examples of, for instance, Joseph McBride makes a great example of the office scene that is mentioned here as a type of examination of the inhumanity of the bureaucracy that Joseph K. is living in. And this idea too of how to capture guilt, the concept of guilt. What is it is are people feeling guilt? If so, why are they feeling guilty? I mean, that's one of the great themes of the film, is how it expresses guilt, even in this very amorphous or ambiguous way. Um, and mentions too about certain other film references. Hitchcock's The Wrong Man is referenced elsewhere. So, all in all, it's a very robust, really wonderful, really great commentary track. So please check this out if you can. So this is one of the great standouts of this Criterion release, one can say, is the availability of watching the film with the commentary track with Joseph McBride. So please check out the film if you have not done so already with this new 2023 commentary track. And it's great to see a new commentary track. We're not seeing so many new Criterion Collection commentary tracks with recent releases, I admit. So whenever it happens, it is a cause for celebration, not only because it exists, but also because of the content. So the fact that it's here, it's new, and it's great as it is in terms of its content, I think those are all things that can be celebrated. So please join me in the celebration of that point by watching the film with a commentary track if you are able to. But that's not all, because we also have a number of supplements here that are included with the Criterion release. I should mention that the supplements are interesting in terms of the Studio Canal release versus this Criterion release. So some supplements you'll find on the Studio Canal release, which are really great, but you won't find on the Criterion release. So if you are looking also for a kind of complete package in terms of what supplements are available, it might be, and if you are a big fan of the film The Trial, and if you haven't done so already, then it might be an option to consider getting both the Studio Canal release and the Criterion release at the same time, in order to enjoy the supplements that are Studio Canal release exclusive, and also the supplements that are Criterion exclusive. And I mentioned one of the great strengths of, those Studio Canal release supplements are really great. I don't want to get into too much detail about them now, but they are really great, and so I think that the Studio Canal release overall is a wonderful release, and I can definitely recommend that. But I can also recommend the Criterion release too, because of the supplements that we have. The commentary track, I think, is one of the main great selling points of this release, so that's something to keep in mind. Also, there are some other interesting ones which we'll talk about here. So the first one up is Filming the Trial, which is, in 1981, director Orson Welles participated in a Q&A for the screening of The Trial at the University of Southern California, shot by cinematographer Gary Graver. This footage was to be the basis for a documentary that Welles was planning to make on the production of the film. That documentary was never completed. This is, again, described as being from 1981. This is approximately 1 hour and 23 minutes. So there is this conceit, or there is a type of conceit that occurs or has or was planned to occur in terms of the films that Orson Welles made and then, or directed, and then having a type of separate and parallel making of type of documentary to be part of that. And so that's, I think, mentioned in some aspects of, say, the commentary track elsewhere. And that was apparently the plan for this project, which was planned to be a documentary to chart the course of the trial. It was never completed, as it's indicated here. But what we have is a kind of feature-length Q&A, which is itself a type of free-form documentary in a manner of speaking, because it's shot in these, it's with Orson Welles on the stage, and it goes immediately to that, and he's in front of this large audience. It's fantastic, and devoted to his work, know his work just so thoroughly based on the questions, and they're really great. There's some great questions, some very, very tongue-in-cheek questions posed, and some very quite direct questions, but never, I think, but the questions are never asked in a disrespectful way, I would say. Some of them are somewhat cheeky and somewhat acknowledging maybe the sort of financial status of Orson Welles, or the perceived financial status of Orson Welles, which is indeed one of the points of the Joseph McBride commentary track in terms of what Orson Welles was perceived to have been in terms of an artist that always goes over budget, that spends too much money on productions, and that's maybe financially or fiscally irresponsible when it comes to spending money on projects, etc. But in fact, Joseph McBride makes the argument that in fact that is not the case. Uh, it's interesting to see certain, say, that the residue of that reputation lingering in some of the questions. Again, not to anyone's discredit, of course, because they're still being posed in a very, very, I think, not disrespectful way. And Orson Welles, I think, takes them all really, really well. I mean, he's very playful on the stage. He's very self-deprecating at some points on stage, which is very refreshing. That's part of the Orson Welles charm and demeanor. I mean, he's got that wonderful, welcoming voice, and he's very witty, very clever. Um, so he talks about illusion and mirrors. There's a scene about mirrors in the film that he also addresses, a question from the audience. And he talks a little bit about the genesis of the project, again, working with the producers of Salkinds. The questions about the existence of evil, how he perceives this, questions about architecture, and also relating this to um, relating it to the Kafka work and how certain changes could be said to be made in terms of the original Kafka work and the film, The Trial. There are actually some, I don't want to go into too much details for the benefit of those who have not yet seen this great work, but there are some key differences that occur. And which is also made mention of in the McBride commentary track. And I think Orson Welles, and McBride as well, but Orson Welles does a really great job of addressing. In fact, I think Joseph McBride is addressing it in his commentary track based on the comments that we hear by Orson Welles in this quote-unquote documentary about the trial, or this Q&A. He does explain his reasonings as to why a specific change was made to a key critical part of the film. And I think it's a very reasonable. It's sort of a really reasonable exchange between the person asking the question and Orson Welles who's answering the question. And he talks too about the aspects of quote unquote sort of the aesthetics of filming this film, say in Europe. And also talking about aspects of space, physical and geographical space, aspects of characters and sexuality, asking too about mass audience appeal versus sort of the individual artist's hopes and plans for the film. And he always very self-deprecating in a lovely, humorous way. He says, "Oh, he always wants to be popular," and and the audience is always laughing and just with him. It's such a great conversation here. He also talks about, he's asked, "Oh, who would you consider being if you were to make the trial now again, circa 1980, 1981? Who would you cast in the main role?" And I think Orson Welles, of course, still expresses his admiration for Anthony Perkins' work, but then he says something about, I think it's about Al Pacino. Wow. Again, this is circa 1981 Al Pacino. Could you imagine Al Pacino in The Trial directed by Orson Welles? Wow, that would be interesting. But in any event, those and other, and also talking too about certain filming locations, use of depth of field, etc. There's also aspects of the childlike perspective, and a lot can be said too about Joseph K's performance, and indeed some of the other characters too. But there's a type of looking at it from the child's perspective, the child's point of view, in terms of an impression of innocence, and also this idea of misunderstanding and not quite understanding what's going on in the quote-unquote adult world. Again, of course, using the phrase in a very the air quotes fashion. Because of course the film also focuses its lens in a very cynical way on the exterior and the bureaucratic and the authoritarian. So, but I think that perspective is also shown both visually and psychologically from the viewpoint of Joseph K. and others. I really got a kick out of this. I think this is great. This is also one of the great strengths here. You can watch. You have the option of watching this here if you get this release from Criterion. So please check this out if you can. This is, again, approximately an hour and 23 minutes. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, hold on, just here. Here we go. The second thing that I wanted to show is for the supplements here, we have Vivre le Cinéma. And Vive le Cinéma is approximately 29 minutes, and it says, directed by Jacques Rosier, this 1972 episode of the French television program Vive le Cinéma was hosted by actor and frequent Orson Welles collaborator Jean Moreau. Over lunch at the Ritz Paris Hotel, Moreau speaks with Welles about their respective careers and the director's experience living in Paris or Paris. This is 29 minutes. So this is a kind of dinner date between Jean Moreau and Orson Welles. And so you see them meeting in this very lovely room. It's kind of deluxe room or suite, and the camera's set up, and it's all set up for this interview or one-on-one discussion. And then they have a meal, and they're talking, and they're most of the time in French, sometimes in English. So you get to experience the French language is spoken by Orson Welles and Jean Moreau. It's a great discussion. They're speaking a little bit about the early career of Welles, his work in the theater, some biographical details as he is explaining it about his father, etc. Talking a little bit of Don Quixote and the like. So this is a wonderful, very intimate portrait. There's a lot, again, just about the mannerisms and seeing them together and seeing them in this. I mean, it's staged in the sense that it's being filmed as part of this interview, which is for this program, of course. But there's also this sensibility about it being an intimate, again, one-on-one. It's a conversation over dinner as well between two friends or two collaborators or two partners, which has this great charm to it. And they're speaking. Primarily the focus is on Orson Welles, and Jean Moreau, I think, is a very gracious host in terms of guiding the conversation, asking follow-up questions, etc. And so providing, I think, a lot of breadth for Orson Welles to speak here. And it's a wonderful conversation. Absolutely great. Again, a very intimate, it's a dinner date conversation, which I really love. So this is from 1972. It's approximately 29 minutes, so you can check that out if you can. And then we have Orson Welles, Architect of Light. This program features director of photography Edmund Richard, recounting his experiences working with director Orson Welles on the trial. So, in fact, this I think has been made available elsewhere, but it's nice to have this made available for the Criterion Collection release as well. So that's good. It's wonderful because we have some discussion from the director of photography about working with Orson Welles, some aspects about location shooting. There's some really very famous sequences that involve large spaces and huge lighting aspects. So, and also the way the camera movements, etc. So this is a really great conversation. This is approximately 23 minutes. There's also a little bit of discussion about the ending and concepts about the approach to the ending, how the ending was shot, etc., and the takes that were involved. So, which also plays a little bit into, maybe somewhat contradicts in an interesting way some of the comments that you hear in elsewhere. So, which is one of the great things about Orson Welles' studies is sometimes you hear things that are consistent but somewhat different from other perspectives, which is again part of the greatness of it. So please check this out if you can, because the camera work and the photography is one of the key aspects of Orson Welles' work, but in particular, or for example, the trial. So check this out if you can. And then we have the great trailer to round out the supplements. So I would say, yes, that for me, I think the supplements, I think, are very interesting. And again, a wonderful way to satiate one's curiosity about Orson Welles studies, but also just to make, again, highlight, among other things, the greatness of these supplements. If you're looking for other supplements that maybe have a sort of comprehensive look in terms of the career of Orson Welles. You might also be interested to take a look at the Studio Canal release. But for me, I'm very pleased with this because, again, we get these the trial-specific discussion points in the Q&A, although you do get those in separate Studio Canal non-Criterion releases, don't get me wrong, but I do like that aspect of this, and I do love the commentary track. So I think the commentary track is a great standout for the Criterion release, and one of the great points, I think, to make in terms of what to get. At the end of the day, it's also good to consider the Studio Canal release, but please check out the Criterion release if you are interested. And if you are really intensely into the film, the trial, it might be worth it to get both releases. But in any event, I think the Criterion release and what it does have to offer, I think it's quite good, and in particular the commentary track. So please, if you're interested, please check it out if you can. So one of the aspects I want to show is the packaging and the discs, and so it's the 2-disc 4K UHD plus Blu-ray option, and we have the 4K UHD here, which has this interesting image on the one part, and then we have a separate image that's used for the Blu-ray disc. I love it when Criterion, when it offers the two discs. I love it when it has these, it makes the discs look different, which I think is an interesting detail. It doesn't do it all the time, but when it does, I think it like it does here for the trial release. I think it's an interesting way of further making it, making the physical media aspect of it all the more charming. But again, a little minor detail. I think this artwork is absolutely splendid. I'm very much loving this artwork. I love that it almost has this great comic book aesthetic to it. Again, I don't know if I'm explaining it, but I think it looks very cool the way that the font is used and stretched out. And again, it's meant to have this, and you have various the way in which the character appears in geographical space, which seems to defy gravity, and this chaotic swirl, which I really love, and the black and white photography is also augmented very much so. And then we have images from the film, or aspects of that which are represented in the fold-out leaflet. But just before I move any further, let me say that in terms of the art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, designer Nessim Higson, art production coordinator William Breeze, and art assistant Julie Sussman. So I think this is very cool. I love this aesthetic. It has that great absurdist comic yet confusing, chaotic aspect to it. I think it's just so apropos of the trial. It's a wonderful representation of what the film is, at least in terms of how I engage with the film. So well done. I think this is great. And then I'm not a fan of the fold-out leaflet. I would have preferred to have seen, excuse me, the staple booklet. I think this is it's a shame because the staple booklet is much better. It's more robust. There are more pages. You could put more essays and writings and pictures in. But oh well, c'est la vie. Because among other things, what we do get is a great essay, and this is Jonathan Lethem's essay, which is called "Crime of the Century." It's a great essay, so please check out the essay. But my strong recommendation, it goes into some great points about Orson Welles' career, some specifics of the themes of the film, the trial, and the underlying Kafka work. So in that regard, my strong recommendation is watch the film first. Watch the film first, and then you can read the great essay, again, called "Crime of the Century." Please check it out if you can. This is the trial, the Criterion Collection release of the trial. I think it could be considered as being a great release, a really great release, perhaps incomplete in the eyes of some. And if you want to go for other, say, technically proficient releases or other supplements, then you can turn your eyes, your attention to other non-Criterion releases, which is totally fair game. I mean, that's part of the landscape of physical media. That's very fair. And if you are interested in the works of Orson Welles or an examination further of the trial, then it might be worthwhile to check out other non-Criterion releases. But you are going to get a lot of great distance in terms of a trial jury into the exploration of the film, the trial, with this Criterion release, because you're getting, I think, among other things, the great commentary track, and then also you're getting the film itself, which looks and sounds quite good indeed in the hands of this Criterion release. So you're getting a very strong release here. All the same, in my view. So, but just keep that in mind in case you are interested. But if at the end of the day, what you are getting is a fabulous and frightening, chilling film, a brilliant example of the artistry of everyone involved, including, of course, Orson Welles in this work from the early 60s. And it is this film, The Trial. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies. I will continue to do this. I'm sorry, I'm feeling I'm very excited about movies. Maybe my physical feelings here at the moment when I'm making this video. I'm not 100% feeling well. I'm a little bit under the weather, so I apologize if that might have shown in the video. I hope you can forgive me, but I don't want to have that get in the way of my excitement and thrill that is my feelings about this great Orson Welles film, The Trial. So my dear friends, thank you so much for watching this video, and thank you so much for continuing to watch the videos on this channel. And until the next one, my dear friends, please continue to be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great movies, including The Trial, including works by Orson Welles, including works in the Criterion Collection, the Studio Canal, and beyond. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.